Hello and welcome to another exciting Blender tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at lighting and how you can set up your lights to shoot your scene like an absolute pro. Let's get started. Now, I want to talk about a couple of ideas. The first thing that you want to do is think about your environment and lighting the space that you're in. Sometimes you do this with an HDRI image. So it's just a basic environment image that lights the whole scene. But the idea is you want to be able to see the scene in your camera. You want to be able to know, where are we? What are you looking at? That's sort of the first thing that I do, is I kind of lay that out. You can see I've put some atmosphere, some smoke in the shot, and I've just kind of get this general pass on the lighting. Now, what you're always thinking about when you're lighting is thinking about emotion and tone, and also creating shape with light. And emotion and tone means, what's the vibe? What's the feeling of the scene? Is it a scary scene? Is it a happy scene? What's the internal state of your main character? How can you externalize that? Now, I wanted this scene to be kind of like this dark and dingy, kind of drab space, really techno sci-fi, but just, a little bit uncomfortable. And I want, because that's how my internal state of my main character is. Now, the other thing that I'm thinking about is shape. So what I mean by shape is contrast. So light and dark. You don't want to overlight your scene. You want to have areas of your scene that go into darkness. You want to have areas that go into light. And the whole point of that is to really give the audience a sense of your space. Like, what does the space look like? How does it feel in 3D? If it's all just sort of this flat color, it doesn't look very good. But if you have bright highlight on something that wraps off into shadow, it's going to look really nice because it gives the audience a sense of this sense of 3D, that it pops out of the frame. And that's what you want to be doing. Now, once I've got that general sense going, the next thing I do is I kind of move into the basics, which is the three main lights you want to use, which is the key light, the fill light, and the rim light. Now, one of the hardest parts about doing that, we'll look at an example in a second, is when you have a wide shot like this, your camera is far enough back that you can actually see the whole scene. And you can't just stick your lights right in the shot because you'll be able to see them. So I'm trying to hide the lights here. And I'm looking for ways that I can hide a key light, hide a fill light, and hide a rim light into my shot in such a way that feels motivated. Now, that's another really key point, is motivated versus unmotivated. Motivated light is basically there's a source that justifies the light. Unmotivated means there is no source and it's not justified and it doesn't make sense why that light's there. Usually you want to have motivated lights because you want to have it kind of make sense. You want it to feel cohesive. You can see I'm hiding lights in the little alcoves, and that's to create motivated moments where I'm able to say, all right, there's a reason there's a light here. There's some kind of light source that's you can't see, but it's tucked in here and it makes sense. The big thing too with key lights, fill lights, and rim lights is I'm trying to really light my main subject. And that's the last big thing you need to think about, is where's the audience eye need to go? So in my case, I'm going to show my audience the space, but I also want to show them the little robots. And so I'm trying to get the eye to go to the little robots. And you can see what I do with this main rim light that I set right behind the characters, the little characters that are walking. It's to achieve something that another really big important part about lighting is separating your characters from the background. So you can see they're kind of getting lost in the fog, but as soon as I put this big bright light behind them, they pop, they stand right out. You can see the edge of them versus the background. And that's a really, really important idea, being able to separate your characters from the background. I also do it over here. Way back here at the beginning, you'll see when I'm lighting the space, I set this light way back here in the hallway in this corner, and I brighten it up. And what this does is this creates this really bright space that highlights the fact that there's a turn in the hallway. Before I do that, you can't see that there's a turn. It just sort of goes into darkness. But by creating this, I get this rim in a sense that kind of highlights this change that's going on. So that's the idea behind a rim light, is you want to be able to separate your characters from the environment so they don't get lost. Now, the idea behind a key light and a fill light are similar to what I was talking about, shaping the space. So, we have these light and dark areas that separate the three-dimensional geometry from each other so you can really get a sense of the space. A key light is sort of the main bright light that's going to be focused on your hero character. You can see I'm kind of playing with this right here, where I get this bright blue light that's on the main character. And the idea is you want to kind of hit your main character from a three-quarter perspective. And the reason for that is because you want to cast shadow into the other side of their face. Again, so you can really highlight the fact that they're 3D. And then what you do is use a fill light. And the fill light is just to kind of lift the shadows. You can see how I'm playing these principles out, right? So here I am creating a rim to get some separation, playing with the fill. And it's not always a strict rule. Like, you're not always going to have just three lights, and you're going to have to play with it. The idea is you kind of start with that as a principle, and then you kind of build up from there. So really continue to think about separating your characters from the background, creating a sense of depth and 3D-ness in your scene by having lights and darks and giving, lights that kind of wrap around things so that the audience can see the texture, see the depth. Not overlighting your scene, making sure you still have really dark areas and really bright areas. Focusing the attention of the audience on what's most important by, having variation in color or contrast maybe, or having a bright light on the main thing that you want people to look at. Mood and tone, thinking about the overall feel and, what do you want people to feel when they see this scene? How do you want them to experience it? What's the internal state of your main character? Now, on a practical level, in terms of how to actually do like a short film, for example, in this one where I've got this timeline where I've got my edit laid down and I'm actually creating the edit live, in this real-time environment, it's really difficult because you can't just keyframe a collection on and off, to have like different lighting setups, because you'll need a different lighting setup for each one. The way I approached it in this, you could see this if you watch the live streams, I created one collection where I did sort of a master light of the entire space, which is sort of like the general ambient, my HDRI basically. I couldn't use an HDRI because I'm in an enclosed space. So I had to create that light myself using lights. So I created a general ambient one and I kept that collection on for all the different shots. But then for each shot, I created a new collection with a different set of lights. So for this wide, for example, the set of lights, they were really wide, they're really far back and tucked into alcoves and stuff. But as soon as I get into these close-ups, I've got a new lighting setup with similar colored lights that I can bring right in and just have them off camera so that I'm really able to shape the look and feel of each shot. And I experiment a lot with the color and the difference. So I've got different versions for each shot as well. Like, where I'm trying different things and seeing, what's the different feel. I showed it to people that I trusted and saw, got their reactions to kind of pinpoint what lighting was going to work best for, what I was going for. And then what I did was when I was ready to render my scenes, I actually took each separate camera and I just saved it out as a separate file. And or you can also break it out into separate scenes using the scenes up here in the top right in Blender. You can create different scenes. And I deleted all my markers from the bottom down here in the timeline, all the camera markers. And so I just had, pick the camera and I'm going to render from this camera and I'll render these frames. And I just turned on the collection that I wanted for that particular one. And then I'll create a new file, select the new camera, look through that new camera and turn on the correct collection that corresponds to it. So one helpful thing is to name your cameras and your lighting setups the same things. You can easily find them if you've got a lot of different lighting setups. And then it's really simple to then go in and render each of those different shots from those different files and you're not gonna have any problems. And it works really well. So I hope all these tips together really help you think about lighting and how you can use it to shape your shots and shape the look and feel of your shot. It goes hand in hand with the camera work, thinking about the composition of your characters like we did in layout. Where do you put everything? How do you have your scene shaped? But then the lighting as well does a lot to help shape that composition further and to continue to direct the eye of the audience to the thing that matters most, your main character. And consider checking out the Patreon. This short film is being supported by the amazing people on Patreon and the amazing people that have joined on YouTube as well. Both places go a long way to helping me continue to make this content. So if you want to continue to see this stuff happen and you want to get behind it, please consider checking those out. You get project files and you also get lots of bonus content, hours of uncut footage that I upload, tutorials that I've abandoned, things like that. There's a ton of cool things up there that you can check out. So give it a look. Okay, so here I am in Blender and I've just got a blank empty scene and I've just brought my character in and that's it. I'm gonna show you the steps you go through to think about lighting, okay? So I like to light an Eevee because I find that it's a really great system for seeing lights in real time. If you're using another 3D software, you might have a really good viewport renderer or something, but it's a good idea to see what it looks like rendered as you're playing with it, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and switch to rendered view. And when you're in Blender, you start off with this gray world environment. And that's where we're gonna go first is the world tab. Now remember what I said, you kind of wanna set the atmosphere, set the sort of general lighting of your space. What time of day is it? What does it look like? So in our case here, let's have a look at an HDRI. So I'm gonna pull up my shader editor. And in the shader editor, we've got the object mode, which is where we create materials for our characters. But if I switch to world, I'm going to be able to load in a world. So this is our background color, which we're using at the moment. You see I can make this fully black to just kind of drop everything off. Another thing that's really helpful is I like to turn off all of my controllers and stuff. So I'm just looking at a blank slate. And it's also a good idea to go ahead and create a camera and look through that. So I'm going to go Shift A, camera, hit 0 to jump into that camera. And then I'm going to go to view on the side tab, lock my camera to view. That's what that is. Hit N to make it go away. And then I'm just gonna zoom out until I can get my robot into frame. Now to get an HDRI, I really recommend polyhaven.com. These guys do amazing stuff. They run it all off Patreon. So the stuff's free to download and use in your projects. So go give them some support through Patreon and have a look at their libraries. Now we're gonna go to HDRIs. And you can just browse these HDRIs. Now, these are going to come in as a very specific file format. If we pick one of these, you can see we get this EXR format. If you're not familiar with that, EXR is just a really large file that has a ton of color information. And you want that. You don't want to use a JPEG or something because they're flattened. A lot of the color information is gone, so that it's just sort of showing you what you need to see, and there's no extra hidden color info. An EXR has got way more color info than your monitor can even show you. So it gives you a lot of room to, change the exposure or to make the shot look the way you want it to. But in Blender or any other 3D package, when you bring an EXR in, it's going to use all of that color information to basically light your scene. So wherever you've got bright areas in the HDR, like here, this window, for example, it's going to create a bright source for your character. Now what we can do is just take that file and we can just drag and drop it right here into Blender, into our world shader. Now, one thing that's important is when you bring it in, it's going to bring it in as just an image texture. That's what Blender does naturally when you drag and drop. So an image texture, if I go Shift A, type in image, it's this kind of material. And you'll notice if I plug this in, oh, it's not really going to work. We're not going to see the HDR. It's just going to be like one color. That's because Blender's looking for a specific type of texture. It's looking for an environment texture to use in the background. So to bring in an environment texture, we need to type in, so Shift A, and then type in environment texture. This is slightly different. Once you've drag and dropped your HDRI into the scene, though, it's in your project, so you can easily load it through another node. So I can just click this little drop-down menu, and there it is, Photo Studio. I can grab that, and now watch when I plug this in, you'll suddenly see it's working now. We can just set sort of a general tone for this. I'm going to change my camera. I'm going to go to this tab, go to Viewport Display, and I'll turn Passport 2 up just to darken the outsides of my frame. I'm also going to turn on Depth of Field because I want to have a shallow depth of field. I'm going to change my f-stop down a bit, and I'm going to get my focus, and I'm just going to adjust it so my robot is really in focus and looks quite nice. All right, cool. So we've now sort of set the tone. Now we can decide how strong we want this background to be by adjusting the strength. We should also set a few more settings in Eevee. We come over to the Render tab. Let's turn on Ambient Occlusion, Bloom, and Screen Space Reflections. Okay, so now that we've set the general vibe of our shot, what we can think about is the volume. Do we want to add any smoke into the shot? If you're going to do that, you can come over here and grab a Volume Scatter node if you're in Blender and Eevee, and we can just plug this in. This will get rid of everything. But if we turn the density right down, and you can change the anisotropy to sort of create these halo effects around certain lights. You can also insert a noise into the color or the density by using a noise node. So if you get like a Voronoi texture or something, so you can kind of see it working there in the background. I could turn this up probably, and you can see it a bit stronger. But yeah, we've got some like fog-like noise in the background. So that's how you go about playing with that. Next thing I'm thinking about is the key, the fill, and the rim light. So let's get those set up. So I'm going to go ahead and go Shift A, and we're going to create a light. And now we've got 4 different types of light. In Eevee, spotlights don't work because they depend upon ray traced lighting. But if you're in cycles, then a spotlight will work. You'll just create a cone of light. Point is just going to give you a nice glowing light source like a light bulb. A sun has no positional value. It's just rotation. It's like, imagine the sun off in the sky. Wherever it points, you just kind of have this one giant light that kind of comes from that direction. An area light is like a halogen bulb, for example, or like a flat panel light where it's really bright and then it has this nice fall off. And there's no light going behind it. It's just kind of going in a directional way, and it just creates these nice soft shadows. What I'm going to do for my key light, I think in this case, is I'm going to grab an area light, and I will turn my controllers back on so I can see, and I'll rotate this, and I'll just position it in front of my little guy. Now I'm going to turn it up so that I can really see it, bring this up a bit. All right, so now what we're starting to see is things are kind of getting a bit blown out, and it's a bit hard to see the difference that this key light is making. So I'm going to go to my world shader and just turn my background down a little bit, okay? So that it's not overpowering the lighting. And then I can bring this one down as well, so I don't have to have it up to like 100. What you can see is it's creating a bit of shape. It's helping create some highlights. We're starting to see the texture on the surface, creating this nice sort of box reflection in the eye. And we're also getting this darker area off to the side. So this is working really, really nicely. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to Shift D to duplicate, and I'll bring it over and I'll rotate Z sort of just to bring the opposite angle. All right. So this is going to be my fill light. So I can come over here, and if I drop the fill off all the way, you can see it kind of goes just to dark. But if I bring it up a little bit, it's going to help to just balance out my light. If I was to turn off my background entirely, you can really see the effect of a fill light. In fact, I'm going to scale this one up so you see it spreads the light out a little bit better. If I turn it off, you can see how he's just completely black. If we turn off all the controllers and stuff, you really can't see him, right? This creates a nice sense of 3D, but this, you lose him. There's no separation in the background. So if I begin to pull this up, it's going to begin to lift this side of him without, diminishing the contrast. If I go too bright, it's going to be just like this side and it's not going to look as good. But if I keep it dim, then we can have this really nice sense of direction. Now, the other thing we need to do is separate him from the background. So he's kind of really dark here along the black background. So if I come here, Shift D again to duplicate, and I'm just gonna pull my view out and I'm gonna grab a 3D view that's not locked to the camera and turn on all my controllers and stuff. I'll grab this one and I'll rotate it around. So now it's right behind him. And usually with a rim light, what you want to do is kind of have it up, above, and I'll rotate down a little bit, kind of like this, okay? And I'm gonna turn this one way up. Usually my rim lights are like my brightest light in my shot. And I'll bring this down. I might scale it down too, so it's really small. And I'm just gonna angle it up. See how I'm angling it up so it's off the ground a bit more. And I'm getting this crescent sort of shape, right? Off the side of his head. And this is really separating him from the background. Creates a lot of contrast. This really bright and then this really dark area. Really does a good job to help separate the character. So I'm gonna bring up my background strength again a little bit and just find a nice spot for it. So maybe like 0.35 is kind of a nice spot. We need this general ambient light, but I'm still dark enough that I can see the rim. And the other thing is really important to think about the position of this HDRI. If I was to come over here and grab a texture coordinate node and a mapping node, and I was to plug my generated into the vector and then the vector into the vector like this, now I can move this HDRI around so I can rotate on the Z. If I was to move this thing around, right, so he's in a really bright area, there's not a lot of contrast between him and the background. So I actually want to look for a place where I'm going to get a lot of nice contrast. So this is actually a pretty good spot for him because he's, right against this dark background. He really stands out. You can get away with the opposite. So if I go over here, it's really bright. You can see that also works because there's enough contrast between the two. So these are very different moods as well. And it could be just finding, what is it you're going for. Now, if I didn't have a HDRI, let's say, and I was using a big open space, I do often light with a sun lamp. So I'll just show you that as a quick contrast. So I'll turn these lights off and I'll turn off my background again, and I'll just create a sun lamp and I'll just rotate it. This tends to be the quickest way for me to light a scene. If I'm just kind of smashing something out, is I'll use a sun lamp. You can see it doesn't matter where it's at. I'm just rotating it. That's all I'm doing. So Shift D to duplicate, rotate it around for my fill, drop it a little bit, and bring it around forward some, and then Shift D again, rotate on the Z to bring it around to the back, brighten this one up, rotate on the X to kind of slide it back so it's pointing right at my guy, and then adjusting that. And you can see you get a very similar feel. We're losing that nice pinprick in the front, so I might bring the key around a little bit more. And with these, you can drop the angle or raise the angle, and that's going to change the size. It's similar to scaling the area light, so that's really helpful to know as well with these guys. But you can see there's quickly a different lighting setup. But typically speaking, if you're shooting a close-up, you want to be working with area lights because you're going to get nicer lighting in general and nicer fall off in general as well. Now, also too in Eevee, you've got these nice controls where you can dim like the diffuse, specular, and volume for each light. So you can get a bit specific. Like I can go here to this area and say, you know what, I don't really want to show up in the specular, so I'm just going to turn that off. So it's just going to show up in the diffuse. That's going to create very different looks. If you've got a lot of volume, you can turn this right down. It won't show up in the volume. You can also change the shape of your area lights. If you wanted a different look, instead of like a square reflection, we wanted to go for a disc, you could have that there. So once you've got your setup with your fill and your rim and all that stuff, the last thing I tend to think about is color as well. So I like to kind of push things into contrasting colors. So what I'll often do is with my key is I'll just pump a little bit of orange or red into it. And with my fill or my rim, I'll come over and I'll pop in a little bit of blue. So those are contrasting colors. So they're on the opposite ends of the color wheel. Anything that's opposite on the color wheel is going to look really nice. So if I come over here and add some blue, you can see it creates a really, really good mood. Now, if I wanted this to be a nighttime shot, I would take my first light and I would also make it blue. So now I'm going to get this like really, dim blue feel. I'm also not going to go too saturated. If you get really saturated, it's going to create a very strong mood. But almost looks like there should be like a monitor or something here glowing. So it doesn't really feel like an atmosphere. If you go lower on your saturation, so you're closer to the center, you're gonna get something that's gonna feel a lot more natural. I hope you found this tutorial really helpful. If you did, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Ring the bell for notifications so you can find out when new videos drop. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next tutorial. Until then, see you later. Bye.